There is a particular kind of person who can congratulate you without actually being happy for you. They smile, they shake your hand, they tell you they're proud, they say you deserve it. And yet, something feels wrong. You can't quite explain it. Nothing they said was openly cruel. There was no insult, no argument, no obvious hostility. Just a strange feeling that your success changed the temperature of the room. Maybe you got the promotion. Maybe your business finally became profitable. Maybe you bought the house you had been working toward. Maybe you became healthier. Maybe you finally escaped a relationship that had been breaking you. Maybe you simply became happier. And the person who used to know everything about your life suddenly becomes difficult to read. Their words say, "I'm happy for you," but their energy says something else. And this is where envy becomes interesting, because envy rarely announces itself honestly. Very few people will look you in the eyes and say, "Your success makes me uncomfortable." Instead, the feeling has to find another language. A joke, a criticism, a comparison, a sudden silence, a reminder of who you used to be, a question that sounds innocent, but somehow makes your achievement feel smaller. Carl Jung understood that the human mind doesn't always reveal its true motives directly. Sometimes what we consciously believe about ourselves is very different from what is operating underneath. And perhaps that is why someone can genuinely believe themselves to be supportive, while another part of them quietly resents what your success represents. Because your success isn't only about money or status or achievement. Sometimes your success becomes a mirror, and mirrors can show us things we'd rather not see. Something strange happens when two people have known each other for a long time. They develop an invisible understanding of who each person is. You become the responsible one. They become the successful one. You are the quiet one. They are the confident one. You struggle financially. They give advice. You need reassurance. They provide it. None of this needs to be spoken. Relationships create these roles naturally, and most of the time, we don't notice them. Until one person changes, you start earning more. You become confident. You stop asking for permission. You become independent. You start making decisions without consulting everyone. And suddenly, the old relationship doesn't fit quite as comfortably. Your success hasn't attacked anyone, but it has changed the balance. And for someone whose identity depended on being ahead of you, that change can feel deeply uncomfortable, because now they have a question to answer, not about your success, about themselves. If they are no longer beneath me, where does that leave me? This is why envy can appear in relationships that once seemed completely safe. Your success changes the comparison, and comparison changes how people see themselves. One of the strangest reactions to another person's success is the sudden appearance of their past. You succeed, and someone reminds you of the time you failed. You become confident, and they tell everyone how insecure you used to be. You build something meaningful, and they bring up the first thing you ever got wrong. You tell them about your new life, and they tell you who you were 5 years ago. Sometimes this is harmless. People remember history, but sometimes the timing reveals something. Why does your past suddenly become important precisely when your present becomes impressive? Because reminding you of your old self can make your new self feel less threatening. If they can convince you that you're still the person who struggled, they don't have to fully acknowledge the person you've become. And there is another psychological benefit. They don't have to update their image of you. The old version of you was familiar, predictable, easy to understand. The new version requires them to reconsider you. And sometimes, people would rather question your growth than update their understanding of who you are. Another sign can be even quieter. They don't attack your success. they simply reduce it. You tell them, I finally paid off my debt. They say, that's not really that much. You tell them, my business is finally growing. They say, a lot of people are doing that. You tell them, I got the position I wanted. They say, it's just a job. You tell them, I've never felt this confident before. They say, don't get carried away. Again, one comment means very little. A pattern means something different. Because minimizing another person's achievement is psychologically convenient. If your success is ordinary, they don't have to feel behind. If your transformation is exaggerated, they don't have to question their own lack of change. If your achievement was mostly luck, they don't have to consider the discipline behind it. And so your success gets reduced until it becomes emotionally safe for them to look at. This is why sometimes the person who cannot celebrate your achievement will work very hard to convince you that there was never much to celebrate. Then there is the behavior that becomes much harder to miss. Competition. You tell them about a promotion. They tell you about theirs. You buy something you've wanted for years. They immediately mention something more expensive. You tell them about a new skill. They explain how they already knew more than you. You share an accomplishment, and suddenly you're listening to theirs. You weren't competing, but somehow a competition has appeared. This is one of the quiet ways envy changes relationships. Your success stops being information. It becomes a measurement. Where are they compared with you? Who is ahead? Who is more successful? Who is more respected? Who has the better life? And once a relationship becomes a scoreboard, intimacy becomes difficult, because friendship requires the ability to celebrate another person's victory without experiencing it as your defeat. Envy struggles with that distinction. If your success feels like their failure, then your happiness becomes threatening, and suddenly they don't need to hate you. They only need you to lose. There is another contradiction worth noticing. Some people become strangely attentive when you fail. When you succeed, they're quiet. When something goes wrong, suddenly they have questions. So what happened? I thought everything was going well. Are you sure you can handle it? Sometimes those questions are genuine concern, but sometimes you can feel the difference. Your setback seems to bring them closer. Your victory seems to push them away. Why? Because your failure temporarily restores the old balance. If you've been moving ahead and suddenly you stumble, the psychological distance closes. They no longer have to feel behind. And this is one of the uncomfortable truths about envy. Another person's failure can create relief, not necessarily joy, not necessarily cruelty, sometimes simply relief, a quiet internal feeling of, good, I'm not the only one struggling. And because this feeling can be unconscious, the person may genuinely believe they're simply being curious. They may not understand why your problems suddenly seem so interesting. Perhaps one of the clearest moments is when other people begin noticing your success. One person can ignore your achievement, but what happens when everyone else starts talking about it? Someone says, you've really changed. Another says, look how far you've come. Someone else says, I'm genuinely proud of you. And you notice one person becomes quiet. They don't interrupt. They don't insult you. They simply withdraw. Because private comparison is one thing, public comparison is another. When other people praise you, the envious person can no longer reduce your success privately. The room has already assigned it value, and now they have to sit with that reality. This is why someone who seems perfectly comfortable with your success in private can become strangely uncomfortable when other people acknowledge it. The issue may not be your success itself. It may be what your success means in front of everyone else. Suddenly, your achievement has become social evidence, and social evidence is difficult to argue with, But there's something deeper happening here, because if another person's success can make you uncomfortable, what exactly are you afraid that success says about you? Maybe that you're falling behind. Maybe that you wasted time. Maybe that you aren't as capable as you thought. Or maybe that the person you secretly envy is showing you a version of yourself you never had the courage to become. And that is where we need to go next, beyond behavior, beyond jealousy, into the part of the psyche where envy becomes a confrontation with the self. There is something about another person's success that can feel strangely personal, even when it has absolutely nothing to do with you. You didn't take anything from them. You didn't defeat them. You didn't even compete with them. You simply built something. You kept going. You changed. You became more disciplined. And eventually, something in your life began to work. But for someone who has been avoiding their own potential, your progress can become uncomfortable, because suddenly there is evidence that change was possible, evidence that discipline mattered, evidence that starting late was still starting, evidence that fear wasn't necessarily a permanent sentence. And this is where Carl Jung's idea of the shadow becomes relevant. The shadow contains aspects of ourselves that we struggle to acknowledge, qualities we reject, desires we suppress, possibilities we abandon, sometimes even the person we secretly wish we could become. So when you succeed, you may unintentionally activate something in another person, not because you are superior, but because your life has become a reminder of what they once wanted, a reminder of what they postponed, a reminder of what they told themselves they could do someday. And sometimes, the easiest way to escape that uncomfortable reminder is to criticize the person holding it. You become arrogant, you become lucky, you become obsessed, you become different, anything. As long as your success doesn't have to mean anything about them. Jung also explored another powerful psychological mechanism, projection. We sometimes place aspects of ourselves onto other people. A person who secretly feels inadequate may become unusually sensitive to confidence. A person who desperately wants recognition may accuse others of seeking attention. A person who feels competitive may insist that everyone else is competing with them. And a person who feels unsuccessful may interpret another person's success as arrogance. This doesn't mean every criticism is projection. That's important. Sometimes criticism is justified. Sometimes people really are arrogant. Sometimes success really does change people for the worse. But projection becomes interesting when the emotional reaction seems much larger than the situation requires. You mention a promotion, and they become defensive. You mention a new opportunity, and suddenly they need to explain why it isn't impressive. You share something you're proud of, and they immediately search for something wrong with it. At some point, the question changes. Instead of asking, "Why are they reacting so strongly to me?" ask, "What might my success be awakening inside them?" Because sometimes, the person you're looking at isn't reacting only to you. They're reacting to what you represent. Perhaps the deepest form of envy isn't really about wanting what you have. It's about mourning what they never became. Think about that for a moment. Someone watches you start a business. They once had an idea too. You begin exercising. They once promised themselves they would. You learn something new. They remember the skill they abandoned. You change your life. They remember how many years they spent saying, "I'll do it later." This is why another person's courage can sometimes hurt more than another person's wealth. Money can be dismissed. Status can be dismissed. Achievement can be explained away. But courage is harder to dismiss, because when someone watches you begin before you're ready, it can challenge the story they've been telling themselves. Maybe they didn't need perfect circumstances. Maybe they didn't need another 10 years. Maybe they didn't need everyone else's approval. Maybe they simply needed to begin, and that realization can be painful. So instead of facing the pain, they may attack the evidence. They call you lucky. They call you obsessed. They say you've changed. They tell themselves you aren't really that successful, because accepting your growth may force them to confront their own unfinished life. And sometimes, envy is grief wearing anger as a disguise. Sometimes the attack isn't direct, it's social. You accomplish something, and suddenly you're being teased for it. You become disciplined, and you're called obsessed. You become successful, and you're called full of yourself. You dress better, and someone jokes that you're trying too hard. You become confident, and someone says, "Look at you now." Everyone laughs. You laugh too. But underneath the humor, there can be a message. Don't get too far ahead. Don't become too different. Don't make us feel like we're standing still. Humor can become a remarkably safe disguise for resentment, because if you object, they can always say, "Relax, it was just a joke," and maybe it was. Again, one moment doesn't prove anything, but if the same person repeatedly uses humor to reduce your confidence, especially after your success becomes visible, then the pattern deserves attention. Not because you need to confront them, but because you need to stop confusing mockery with friendship. Someone who cares about you can tease you, but someone who needs to diminish you is doing something different. Another behavior is subtle, but exhausting. Suddenly, they have an explanation for everything you've accomplished. You worked hard, you had connections, you became successful, you were lucky, you built something from nothing, you had help, you became confident. Someone must have inflated your ego. Notice what is happening. They aren't necessarily denying that you succeeded. They're denying the meaning of your success, because if your achievement came from discipline, then discipline matters. If it came from courage, then courage matters. If it came from years of persistence, then persistence matters. And if those qualities are available to you, perhaps they're available to them too. But if your success was simply luck, they don't have to examine themselves. This is why reducing someone else's achievement can be psychologically comforting. It preserves the belief, if I really wanted what they have, I could have it too. The problem is, that belief can survive forever, because it never has to be tested. Eventually, you may notice something even more revealing. They don't necessarily want you to fail, they simply want you to become familiar again. The old you was easier. The old you answered every call. The old you explained every decision. The old you tolerated disrespect. The old you needed their approval. The old you didn't have boundaries. The old you was available. And now, you're different. You say no. You protect your time. You make decisions independently. You don't need everyone to understand you, and someone may interpret that growth as rejection. They may say, "You've changed," and perhaps they're right. You have. That's the point. Growth means changing. The question is not whether you've changed. The question is whether you've changed into someone more honest, or simply someone more defensive. And that's something only you can answer. But never confuse another person's discomfort with proof that your growth is wrong. Sometimes, people miss the old version of you because the old version made them feel more secure. There's an important trap here. Once you've learned to recognize envy, you can start seeing it everywhere. Someone doesn't congratulate you. They're jealous. Someone disagrees with you. They're threatened. Someone gives you criticism. They secretly hate your success. And now, you've created another prison, because you're still measuring your life through other people's reactions. Jungian psychology isn't about becoming obsessed with everyone else's unconscious motives. It's about becoming conscious of your own. So don't spend your life trying to prove that someone envies you. You don't need the diagnosis. You need awareness. Notice patterns. Protect your boundaries. Stay humble. Keep your relationships where there is genuine reciprocity. And most importantly, don't let another person's possible envy turn you into a suspicious person who trusts nobody. That's not freedom. That's another form of fear. You don't need to know exactly what someone feels inside in order to decide what kind of relationship you want with them. You don't need everyone to celebrate your success. You don't need everyone to understand your choices. You don't need the people from your past to approve of the person you're becoming. And you certainly don't need to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel tall. Your success belongs to you. Your discipline belongs to you. Your transformation belongs to you. And if someone genuinely loves you, they may not understand every decision you make. They may even challenge you. But deep down, they won't need you to fail in order to feel okay about themselves. That's the difference. Healthy relationships can survive another person's success. Secure people can celebrate someone else's victory without experiencing it as their defeat. Mature people can say, "I'm happy for you," and actually mean it. And when you encounter people who can do that, value them. Because genuine celebration is a form of love, and the ability to watch someone rise without needing to pull them back down is one of the clearest signs of inner security. Maybe someone changed when you succeeded. Maybe they became colder. Maybe they started competing. Maybe your achievements suddenly needed explanations. Maybe they remembered every mistake you'd ever made. Maybe they laughed at the very qualities that helped you change. Or maybe you simply sensed that your success made someone uncomfortable. If you've experienced that, don't rush to hatred. Don't rush to revenge. Don't spend your life trying to expose them. And don't become obsessed with proving that they secretly envy you. You don't need to win that psychological argument. You only need to understand something important. Your growth will sometimes change the relationships around you. Not because growth is cruel, but because change reveals things. It reveals who can celebrate you, who can grow beside you, who needs you to remain the same, and sometimes who was only comfortable with you when you were struggling. But remember something else. Someone else's envy doesn't make you superior. Their insecurity doesn't make you more valuable. Their resentment doesn't make your success more meaningful. Your worth cannot depend on being ahead of someone else. Because if your happiness requires someone else to feel small, you haven't escaped comparison. You've simply moved to the other side of it. Real growth is different. You become more secure, and you need less applause. You become more successful, and you need less comparison. You become more confident, and you become less interested in proving yourself. You stop asking, "Are they jealous?" and start asking, "Am I living honestly?" That's the question that matters. Because your life isn't a competition with the people around you. Their timeline isn't your timeline. Their regrets aren't your regrets. Their choices aren't your choices. And their reaction to your success is ultimately theirs to carry. So if you're growing, keep growing. If you're succeeding, keep building. If you're becoming more confident, don't apologize for it. And if someone can't celebrate the person you're becoming, you don't have to become the person you used to be. Just to keep them comfortable, let them have their feelings, let them have their opinions, let them walk their own path. You have one too, and perhaps the greatest victory isn't making the people who doubted you regret it. Perhaps it's reaching a point where you no longer need them to. Keep building, keep becoming, and whatever you do, don't shrink your life to fit someone else's insecurity. And now I'm curious about you. Have you ever noticed someone treating you differently after you became successful? Did they become distant, more competitive, more critical, or did they suddenly start reminding you of who you used to be? What changed when you succeeded? Share your experience in the comments. And remember, you don't have to shrink to remain familiar. You don't have to hide your progress to protect someone else's ego. And you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Keep becoming.